Well, we are so excited to be joined by the great Lauren Patten. Lauren has a BA in creative writing from the New School and lots of other training. We're going to chat about the bipping and bopping around that she did. She was on Broadway in Fun Home and Jagged Little Pill, where she won the Tony Award, Grammy Award, and Drama Desk for her wonderful performance as Jo. She was in The Wolves off Broadway, Deaf West's Spring Awakening, and recently the world premiere production of The Lonely Few with MTCA alum Helen Chen, no big deal. On your screens as Rachel Whitten on Blue Bloods, which she did for 6 seasons, The Good Fight, Big Sick, Succession, we've heard of it, and is also a musician playing sold out shows at Rockwood Music Hall, The Bitter End, and an upcoming July 10th at Sony Hall. Lauren, welcome on the pod. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here. How are you?
I am doing wonderfully. I'm back on solo daddy duty as of this morning for a couple
Oh,
days while Elizabeth's doing a concert. So it's its own stress. Half of my brain is in this podcast and half is with my child, as you do.
as it goes, absolutely. You're adorable, sweet baby child.
Adorable, sweet. Yeah, we agree with that. Okay. Speaking of you as an adorable, sweet baby child, I'm going to start you off with what all of our performers get a sort of question of like, how did you think about this as you went into college? But especially with you, you started really young, and then it seemed like by high school you're really already doing professional theater. When you
Mhm.
hit that college age, what were you thinking about and looking for in a program in a college experience? Maybe at that first outset, 16, 17.
Yeah, I was working professionally at that time. I started doing professional theater when I was 12. And really, I think I always felt strongly that I wanted to go to college. I loved school. I was an academic person. I enjoyed it. So I knew that I wanted to go um, to college in general. But as I got to that sort of 16, 17 age, I really started to notice in working how much I needed training. I
Mm-hmm.
think I just felt really strongly. I was doing a little bit of musicals, but primarily plays.
Mm-hmm.
And I was often the youngest person in the show, or maybe the only child in the show with older adults. And I
Like I
think
didn't read it, but you did like Anne Frank, right? You were doing like
yeah,
real
I
lead roles
did.
as a kid.
Yeah, I did Diary of Anne Frank. I did Bus Stop which is a
Mm-hmm.
William Inge classic, and really, I think the show that I did that I felt the strongest about, and it was coinciding with me auditioning for colleges, is I did a production of Doubt,
Mm-hmm.
and that was with only three other actors, and they were all really brilliant. And the actors who I had scenes with were both Yale MFA grads,
Mm-hmm.
and I just watched them work, and I could see that they had technique and a method and something to fall back on when things weren't working. And I just felt like as the run was going on, I could feel that I didn't know how to adjust. I could feel that I didn't know what to do when a scene stopped like naturally working. I
Mm-hmm.
think I was running on my instincts, which served me, but
Mm-hmm.
at a certain point that ran out, and then I didn't know what to do. And I think working with really trained, experienced actors professionally at that point, I could just feel the gap between my
Mm-hmm.
experience and where my instincts could take me and what that training offered. So I think I really felt strongly, if I want to do this, I really want what those actors have.
Well, and then tell me a little bit about the journey. I mean, I know you hopped around a little bit. You spent some
Hmm.
time at NYU, some time at
Hmm.
USC, Stella Adler, the New School in different. I mean, that order might not be right, but talk to me about like what were those experiences and what prompted some of the bopping and bipping.
Well, my first college was NYU, and I got into the Tisch acting program,
Mm-hmm.
and I studied at Stella Adler there. And my intention was to do my 4 years there and get my BFA at NYU. After my first year, it just became clear that I couldn't financially afford to stay,
Uh-huh.
and I wasn't able to get financial aid from NYU. So I had written an appeal and really pushed hard to get that and wasn't able to. So uh, I didn't leave out of choice. It just didn't
Mm-hmm.
financially, it wasn't feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was really disappointed about that when that happened. But now I look back and I really wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm actually really grateful that I didn't end up doing that for 4 years. But me hopping around to different schools came out of that necessity.
Mhm.
And I moved to California. I was living in LA and just working again. But I knew I wanted to get my college degree,
Mhm.
and I also wanted to continue to train. So I decided to continue my training with Stella Adler, both in New York and in LA. I went back to New York and did summer intensives, and I
Mhm.
did classes that would have summed up what probably my second year of education at Adler would have been. And then I was continuing to pursue academics at schools in Los Angeles.
Mhm. This is at
Um,
USC, perhaps. Yeah.
yeah, USC, I did community college as well.
Mhm.
And then USC, I also did summer classes at UCLA, which counted for credit. So I was all over the place there. Um, and I was working on an English degree at
Mhm.
USC. I found it a little difficult. I looked into continuing an acting program, but a lot of colleges, I don't know if it's still this way, but this for me now was about 10 years ago. They, if you're a transfer student, often want you to start at
Mhm.
their year one
Mhm.
and don't. So I had my first year of acting training at NYU, and when I looked into transferring to acting programs in California or elsewhere, it was a lot of I would have
Right,
to
starting
start at
another
year one of
program.
training there,
Totally.
which I wasn't interested in doing, particularly because I had already been working professionally too.
Mhm.
I wanted to continue my training at a more advanced level where I had left off. Um,
It's so
so
interesting
that,
that I feel like I often talk about there's not a natural it doesn't naturally go together to have conservatory style training and college normally. That
yeah,
schools do that because of the nature of 18 to 22 we go to college in America, but
correct.
that it doesn't necessarily make sense. So it seems like you're able to cobble together the conservatory style training to get
Hmm.
the acting training you need. Do you feel like did you miss out on like the social experience of college? Do you feel like you got to do like not that everyone does frat parties or whatever that experience of it,
Right.
but the 4 years of growth with a quad and like, was it difficult with the bopping around that you felt more adult or that you didn't get some of that college experience?
I did feel more adult. I think that I did, not in a way that I'm sad about per se, but just I did miss out on that experience. But I also think in some ways I wouldn't have gotten that experience at NYU because it's not
Hmm.
which would have been the school that I would have done all 4 years at, because there's no real campus. Like
Yep.
that is a New York City school where you are living in a building in New York. And there's some of that. I mean, I went to parties and I had my college friends and all these things, but the most sort of traditional college that I went to was USC, and that
Hmm.
had a proper campus. And I would be walking to my classes, and the marching band for the football team would be practicing on the field. And like it really felt like, oh, this is like a college. This
Hmm.
feels like an actual college. Um, but at that point, I was not living in dorms. I was living on my own in an apartment in Los Angeles, and I commuted. And I was often a little bit older than
Uh-huh.
my classmates, just by a couple of years. Um, so I didn't really ever have a very traditional college experience, and I did kind of miss out on that.
Yeah. I mean, not that abnormal for actors. I feel like, yeah, to your point, a lot of NYU kids talk about, or Pace kids talk about having that very similar sort of, I'm an adult at 19 years old. I'm in college,
Yes.
but it doesn't feel like I'm sequestered on a campus college experience.
No.
Tell me about the LA stuff. So you're doing Deaf West Spring Awakening with fellow
Hmm.
podcast guest Chris Rodriguez, and you ended up moving
Yes.
to New York with Fun Home. How does that? I think
Hmm.
people are often. It feels like for a young person, especially, to be like, how does that happen? Or do you have bi-coastal representation? Are you submitting? Was it digitally back then already self-taped? How are you booking Fun Home while living in LA?
Fun Home was sort of an interesting one because I didn't have bicoastal representation, and I went to audition for a workshop of something that was the same casting people as Fun Home, and they were sort of, I don't know if it was necessarily covert, but it felt covert. They were sort of looking for people for Fun Home too.
Uh,
So I went in for this audition, which I was not right for at all, and and then they asked me if I would cold read sides from Fun Home, and they taped me for that. And then I flew to New York to
hmm.
audition for the creative team from that. So that wasn't like I didn't pursue auditioning for Fun Home. That wasn't something that I self taped. It was a weird sort of happenstance that I
Mhm.
went in for these casting people.
And were you
And
planning at the time to be an LA actor? Were you always hoping to move to New York at some point, or how did that? Because you decided now to go with it,
yeah,
and it seems like stayed in New York.
no, I always envisioned myself in New York. I'm much more of a New York person. I went
Hmm.
after I left NYU. I went to Los Angeles because I knew more people there. I had worked at a theater company outside of Los Angeles a lot as a teenager, and so I had support there. I just had both more personal and more work contacts there, where I would be a little bit more supported. I had talked to my parents about potentially staying in New York, but the only people I knew in New York were my NYU classmates, and that
Hmm.
was it. And I wouldn't have had as much support, and for what it means financially to just live in New York, all these things. Um, so it made more sense for me to go to Los Angeles logistically. Um, but that being said, I did have a lot going on in LA. I was going to USC, and I had gotten a half ride there, so I intended to finish my degree there.
Hmm.
I was in Deaf West Spring Awakening, which I had planned to stay with. I was developing another musical, which had a production in San Francisco that seemed like it was having a life. So I had some theater work
Hmm.
happening out there that I was invested in, and the fact that I had gotten this scholarship at USC where I could uh, feasibly get a degree because
Hmm.
that was important to me. And I had worked hard going through community college and applying for financial aid and doing a lot to get myself
Yeah,
settled at a
wanted
different
that degree.
school.
Yeah,
So
and
I was hesitant to go to New York actually at that time in my life.
hmm and were you thinking of yourself then as because when I look at your resume, of course I know you best from Jagged, of course, is where how
Yeah.
you entered my life.
Yes.
But you really have a great balance of non-musical plays, musicals, and then TV and film. Like, what
Hmm.
were you thinking at 19? I think a lot of our people or a lot of our students feel like I kind of want to do everything. Some are definitely Broadway only, but like, were you thinking I want to do everything? Were you thinking I want to primarily do musicals, primarily do non-musical plays? What were you thinking about sort of your career? It seems like in LA you were doing more theater than TV, interestingly. But
Yes.
but
Yeah.
was what was the dream for Lauren at 20 or whatever this was?
Yeah, I did not envision myself much in musicals, honestly. I didn't. I
Their
had
jaws dropping
always.
across America. They're all just like, "How is that? Lauren Patton, who I would idolize as this musical theater actor." Yeah.
It's funny though because I think I always sang um, from the time that I was a kid, but I think I also didn't really know where my place was at that time in musical theater.
Hmm.
Um, and I also, I think, and I know that this might also seem weird to hear, but I also had a lot of hangups around my voice and
Hmm.
anxieties and stuff. Like it's, which I like to tell people because it's not, that isn't a sign of skill or
Hmm.
ability or talent or whatever. I think singing is very vulnerable. And I had
Hmm.
a lot of anxieties around my voice that I
Hmm.
still can have, that still come up for me. So I found musicals very stressful.
Hmm.
Um, and I didn't feel that I had a much of a place in them all the time. And I really loved acting, and that's what I identified. And I still really identify primarily as just an actor.
Hmm.
Um, so I wanted to also do television and film. I was struggling to break into that in Los Angeles and was able to do more theater, which is, ironic that that's what I was primarily doing in
Hmm.
that town. And most of my television work has been in New York. But that's really how I envisioned myself. I wasn't like gunning for musicals
Hmm.
necessarily. I just loved theater, and that's what I'd definitely done my whole life. And I always envisioned myself doing theater, but I also wanted to do TV and film.
We'll definitely talk about voice on the second half of the show in general,
Mhm.
but I do think your strength as an actor also is one of your big strengths as a musical theater person. That like to be a musical theater, to have the wonderful voice that you have, but also be like, this person is completely an actor on stage.
Mhm.
It is thrilling for an audience as opposed to watching someone just stand and sing or just dance or to be
Yeah.
able to say there's other
Yeah.
forms here. What about you're saying sort of trying to break through and find your place in the musical theater? Was that something that you felt like Fun Home then gave you? What was that experience like? Now, of course, you're proud to debut at a very young age.
Mhm.
What was the experience of working with that show?
I mean, Fun Home almost didn't really feel like a musical to me in
Hmm.
some ways. It really, it very much is a proper musical, but I think my experience with that and my focus on it came so much from it as a play.
Hmm.
really, that I think in some ways, Jagged is more the experience of really feeling like I found what my place as a musical
Huh.
artist is on
Hmm.
stage. Because with Fun Home, I think, I also felt that I very much had a place in what that world was vocally, because it really was a space for character, you know?
Hmm.
And I remember when I was even just on auditioning for it, they were just asking me to try to sound less pretty. Like they just didn't want me
Uh-huh.
to focus on sounding away or good,
Uh-huh.
even necessarily, um, which I really appreciated. So I think I would say, as far as me finding what felt like more my place, um, I would say Jagged was really the show that
Yeah.
started to help me do that.
And what was were you already I know, I think it's post Jagged that you really start the sort of rock star career, and the more, it seems like that's more of the true rock concerts. Was that something
Mhm.
you already did in high school? Were you sort of singing in rock bands? Are you interested in that kind of
No.
music? Or was that all post Jagged?
I mean, I was interested in that kind of music, but I never thought I would do concerts. I really
Hmm.
didn't. Again, because it all seemed stressful and kind of terrifying to me. The notion of it was anxiety inducing for me to sing one song in like a compilation concert, much less do an
I,
entire an
I'm telling
entire
you,
set.
like, I really appreciate that you're saying this, because if you listen to our students, and I think you are a name that when our song coach will say, "Hey, who's someone you want to be, 10 years from
Mhm.
now, or someone you emulate?" I think the number of them who say you, and the number of those people who would then think, "Oh, I'll bet she's really insecure about her voice." Like literally, all these people are like,
Yeah.
"Oh, if I had a voice like Lauren, I wouldn't think about my voice at all." It's
Yeah,
really interesting to hear.
it is, it's funny. I think people really think like you're just not insecure about it or
Hmm.
have anxieties about it if you're, quote unquote good or talented or whatever. And I just think singing is like one of the most vulnerable things we can do as a
Yep,
person. And so I just think it's a very vulnerable thing to do
incredibly
for
vulnerable.
anybody.
Oh,
Um
it's like me. Like, people often say, like, "Well, you must not be insecure because you're so beautiful." And I'm like, if you can believe it, even me, I sometimes
well,
feel
I
insecure.
think
Like,
about that.
yeah, all the time. We all feel that way. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
No, but I do want to. We're getting this. I want to fast forward to Jagged, and just you
Okay.
knocking it out of the park as Joe. I mean,
Thank you.
every night getting a standing ovation in the middle of the show. At least all the times I saw it. You get the Tony, the Grammy, every other award they can give people. Like, now, this must have been this is the first role that you originated with this long of a duration, right? This was I mean, I
Yes.
only saw Elizabeth's journey with it, and it was many years.
Mhm.
It started before we met, and here we are with a child. Like that.
Mhm. Mhm. I know.
What was that experience of growing this, role from not nothing? I mean, I guess from a script and from some songs that you knew
Mhm.
existed, but growing and cultivating this character over a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean it's an immense privilege, and I have been involved in developmental workshops of things before, but I've this is the only time that I've ever experienced um, taking it from its true first form,
Hmm.
um, all the way through to a culmination of a Broadway production. And I think it is rare to get to do that. A lot of times I've come into a development process and this is a character that's been played by other people before or been read,
Hmm.
but whatever, or it's farther along, or I start at the beginning and then I move on, or the development of the show moves on without that's part of being an actor in New York working
Hmm.
on new work. Um, so this is really the first time, and I've done long-standing development of characters before, but that's particular trajectory, it it really is very lucky to get to
Yeah.
do that.
And I
Uh,
imagine in some ways vulnerable too, because you are putting parts of yourself, like, it's like doing
mhm.
stand up or something where you're like, well, if they don't like me, they really don't like me. Those are my words. There's no playwright
Yeah.
to say, like, I mean, there was, of course, a playwright with Jacket, but that you're, able to add some of your own spin and your own self into the role.
A lot of you goes into it when you're in that kind of a development process.
Uh-huh.
When you're really with it from the beginning through it, your voice, your thoughts, your dramaturgical opinions, all of these things get really, your spirit gets put into it, and I feel that very strongly
Yep.
with that. It very much, even though I am not the character, and it's
Yep.
not like autobiographical in some
Right.
way. In a lot of ways, it also is deeply me.
It's parts. Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing like, oh my God, there's parts of Elizabeth's mother. Like after I'd met Elizabeth's mom, like, oh,
Hmm.
there she is. Okay, and there's some of her. Oh,
Yeah,
that's her family background. There, like, of course, it's not you, but you see little aspects of that.
absolutely.
Can we talk a little bit about the experience from the backlash perspective too? Of course, this being a role that you created and people seeing themselves in what you created, and then
Hmm.
some people feeling as the role grew and changed, maybe it should no longer be played by a cis actor, and then the
Hmm.
clarifying the role and some of the protests. You don't necessarily have to give us the full blow by blow. I'm sure people can go down the internet if they want to hear the whole journey of the controversy. But I guess I'm curious of like, especially now a couple years removed, with the perspective of like what being the center of that maelstrom was like. I guess, I mean, from the outside, knowing it's not actually all about you. This experience is not about Lauren Patton necessarily and her choices as much as it is a lot of factors out of your control. But I guess what was that experience going through that through a pandemic and Tony season and all the things that happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was. It's honestly really hard to describe, and especially as you mentioned, like during so much of the height of it was also during this pandemic, and like nothing, nothing felt normal or stabilizing
Hmm.
during that time. I think for pretty much anybody, and also trying to get the show back up on its feet and not knowing what theater was even really looking like at that point, and all of these aspects of it. But I think that um, while it was obviously a very difficult time. Um, I think that what I just kind of returned to is I ultimately think that it was um, one conversation among a lot of conversations just about theater in general and
Hmm.
how we need to make space for people to see themselves represented properly in theater and be able to be part of it, both in seeing themselves and their stories told, but also being part of the industry. Um, which I'm in big support of. So I feel that while there were aspects of it that were personally difficult, of course, um, I hope, and as you said, with time, I hope that the conversation was useful
Hmm.
ultimately and helps people who are continuing to develop work think about things with more intention, um, as far as representation for the trans and non-binary community, and all of the other marginalized communities that are looking
Hmm.
for space in this industry. So I have hope that the conversation and sort of what did become like a maelstrom and very emotionally fraught. I just hope that positive things for that representation come from it.
Well, and I'll say from the outside, just watching you engage with it, I thought was, I really appreciated that. It felt very easy to, like, it could have been very easy to disengage from it because of, it was, as you said, a very turbulent time.
Hmm.
Um, and watching you continue to try to engage with it in integrity and try to learn and try to, participate
Hmm.
and listen, it was really exciting. And I hope not only that for this specific conversation, people can take that something from it, but maybe also future actors who are going through different situations can kind of watch like, how do I kind of show up and try to listen and try to be present and and
Hmm.
live in this thing.
Yeah, I think I feel strongly that I don't think there wasn't a version of disengaging that I would have
Hmm.
felt okay about. I don't think that just that doesn't sit well with me to just I understand why other people maybe don't feel emotionally capable of showing up for it or different things,
Yeah.
but I don't think that there's a version of disengaging that would sit right for
Well,
me.
how does that relate with like your personal social media use? Because I think so much of
Hmm.
that time to me is just like, because that was our contact to the world. I mean, other than me and
Yeah.
Elizabeth sitting drinking in Maryland, whatever, it was like this,
Yeah.
like our engagement was through online, but it's primarily social media. How does that? And obviously, that's how you're engaging with a lot of these conversations, engaging with the public
Hmm.
and the conversation. How does that sort of? Do you factor in like your own mental health in sort of going? I want to take care of myself and not, as we saw from Vivek Murthy, that we know social media now is, not that we haven't known this for years, is
Yeah.
deleterious to our mental health. But like,
Yeah.
how do you factor that in of like, I want to engage with where the fans are, but also for myself personally, I need some boundaries and I need some, safety for your own relationships, your own life.
Yeah. I think that that's something that I had started to um figure out for myself and create boundaries around. probably in like, I think 2018, early 2019, something
Mhm.
like that. You know, I just as social media, as it got bigger in my life and
Mhm.
how it functioned in my work as well, I just think I realized that there was something that didn't it, there was sort of a porousness to the boundaries of when I was at work
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah.
didn't feel right to me. I realized that I was doing essentially work uh, in, in the middle of the night in my bed at home,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I didn't need to be doing that. It was
Mhm.
just it's different than sort of the more traditional ways of engaging with fans. Like, I love nothing more than to get a letter at the theater.
Mhm.
But at Jagged, I had all the letters that I got taped up on my door, on
Mhm.
my dressing room door. Um, I love stage door, all of these things. But there's a concreteness to that of
Yep.
I'm showing up to the building and I'm at work.
Yep. There's a literal boundary of the door that I walk in.
Exactly. And so I do think that I have found ways where boundaries are really important to me now with it
Mhm.
for mental health, for workload, and also having separation, that my whole
Mhm.
life doesn't get sort of consumed by whatever show I'm working on, or that type of thing. Because there's also just stuff that and I believe that with certain types of like conversations too that fans are having online, they're not for me to read.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, it really isn't my business, like positive or negative. And um
Yeah.
I know some actors are like that with reviews and stuff, but it's just I'm not meant to read and hear all of that,
It's so
and
true.
that's really important to me.
That's sort of what yeah, I guess what I mean by the maelstrom is that it
Mm.
feels like at some point I'm like, this isn't about Lauren anymore because none of these people know Lauren or know her experience, but they're talking about a larger conversation, which they should be able to talk about, but isn't necessarily like you. Like does feel like that's for them to talk about their experiences with the show and with the character that aren't necessarily about your human self, or at least from your perspective about your character in the sense of I don't mean your character in the show, I mean your character as a human
Mm,
being weren't necessarily what people were talking about. Even though that
mm,
line is really confusing at times. Like
mhm,
you'd read stuff and you go, "Ooh, that feels like it's a personal character attack on Lauren."
mm,
That person I don't think knows Lauren. Yeah.
mm.
What if we switch gears and talk a little bit about Blue Bloods? Because this
Sure.
is all happening simultaneously, right? So you're doing 6 seasons
Mhm.
overlapping with this amazing. Oh my gosh, you're really hitting the New York theater scene and exploding onto it. And
Yeah.
you're doing this TV show for 6 seasons. What was the experience, I guess, of the different mediums, and then also maybe doing them simultaneously? Did you ever feel like one was pulling from another, one was informing each other as you're both on screen and on stage at the same time?
I mean, I was so fortunate with Blue Bloods that they really worked so flexibly with my Broadway schedule as well. And, um, that was just a very fortunate thing for me, that I didn't feel too pulled either way. Um, they were really great about if I needed to be offset to go to the show, then they made
Hmm.
that happen. And, um, sometimes I was filming while I was also doing the show. And then, there were other times where filming was sort of what my main job was, when we
Hmm.
were waiting for Jagged to get a Broadway theater, or during the pandemic when theater wasn't happening, but
Hmm.
film had come back. Um, so the balance tended to work out, which I was really grateful for.
Did you
Yeah.
ever feel any of the like, oh God, they'd write me a bigger character if I could be more available? Like, was there any of that like pull of like, well, I want to grow in this area, but this is pulling away from this, or maybe vice versa. If I want to give more attention to this theater thing, but I don't want to lose this TV thing.
Yeah, I think that I didn't think about it too much in some ways, because I did ultimately end up, I played Vanessa Ray's partner on the show, and I did end up having kind of a written off thing with that,
Hmm.
partially because my schedule was I was getting too busy with other
Hmm.
things that were happening. Um, and they needed somebody who could be there more consistently. Um, but I think I just sort of let the it go with the flow in that sense, and in that I think that that's something that you really it helps me a lot with my mental health as an actor if I can just really just try to trust that things work out the way they're going to work out,
Yeah,
rather than trying to like finagle, well, how can I hold on to this but also show it, if you have to make decisions about your priorities, then you have to make those decisions, but also things kind of can fall into place
yeah,
along those lines. I mean,
yeah.
I just finished filming, or a little while ago last year finished filming my first series regular for a television show,
Mm,
which is
mm,
awesome.
mm.
And with a series regular contract, I just have, if that show continues, then I film when they tell me to film, and that's
Right.
it. And there's
You're
no,
locked
if
in.
I have
Yeah.
other projects going on,
Yep.
it doesn't matter. And that sort of, I could get really stressed about that, or I can just say it's going to just be what it's going to
Right.
be.
The stress of it would be like, I have this amazing series regular. God, what if some better thing comes along? Right? Mind goes to that thing of like,
Hmm.
what could it be
Hmm.
preventing me from, as opposed to like, oh my
Right.
God, I've got this amazing Broadway show. I'm on
Right.
this amazing TV show. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, that's great. That's a great attitude, and I wish that for all of our students, and maybe especially our
Yeah.
parent listeners who definitely have an element of, I want to know how this will work out. I want the
You
control
can't
part.
control it. You just really, really can't. And anything that feels like you are controlling it, it's an illusion. It
Hmm.
just is.
Ain't that the truth? All right, we got to talk. While we're talking hit TV shows, we got to talk a little bit about Succession. So, were
Yeah. Oh my
you a
God.
watcher before you booked it?
Well,
Had you already
that
been
was the
watching?
first season, so
Uh huh.
I did not know what the show was. Nobody really knew what the show was. Had no idea what it would
Hmm.
become, and I feel like the show really, I mean, obviously was, I mean, Emmy contender from the first season, but I feel like culturally it really hit in the second season. I feel like
Second,
that's when
totally
everybody
agree.
started going, "Oh my God, what is the
Yeah,
show?"
it
Um,
felt like it ramped up in the first season. The first couple episodes, I was like, so I'm not sure, and then it felt like it
right.
really found its stride. Maybe as soon as you were done is when I think it.
It was
That's when it
really, it
really
was
found its
because I
stride.
came on as I
That's it.
really,
You
if
graced it, and it goes.
only.
Now we found our footing.
Not at all. I felt like I had no idea what I was doing, and like, because I was so new to television, I was so intimidated because
But
it was like a fancy prestige HBO show, and I felt so
like,
nervous.
the idea of being on a TV show, I think many actors can kind of understand and go like, "Oh, that'd be so cool." I kind of get it, but I think there must be a particular experience of being on a TV show that you're like, I actually want to watch this as a fan.
Hmm.
Like, I want to know what happens next. Like, that's got to be such a. And then you're like, wait, I'm in it. Like that would be so freaky to me to be like in The West Wing or in some one of the shows. You're like, I watched
Yeah.
this show.
I'm honestly so grateful that my one episode was in the first season, so that I didn't go in with the like, as I feel like if it had been
Yeah.
any other season than that, I just would have been so
The
scared.
characters. Yeah, you're like, Kendall. Now I know who
Yeah,
you are. Oh God, yeah. But now you were just
I
like, this
think
is
I
some
would have been freaking
actor.
out.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
Okay, let's do a little break, and then we're gonna deeper dive on the back half
great.
into some vocal questions.
Exciting.
All right, we're back with the great Lauren Patten. We've taken a sip and we're ready to dive into some vocal questions. So, we try to do like a superpower with each of our artist guests. And I could have chosen a
Mm.
bunch for you. I really feel like I could have chosen like stage presence, but just our last episode was about to come out. We did something very similar with Jesse Mueller. So, I want to go in a different direction
Oh my God, Jesse, yes.
because the two of you have very similar stage presence. But you're going to say, no, that's a joke. Not that you don't. Not
You
that you
know what?
don't.
But do you know that I
Comparing
know
contrast.
Jesse from Chicago? We did a production of A Christmas Carol at the Goodman Theater when I was 17 years old,
You better
before she
talk
got her
about a
first
small
Broadway
world.
show.
You better talk
And
about the small world. It really is.
she's one of the
Um,
best people.
she really is. She was a great guest. Not to hype up the interview that people haven't heard yet, but she's a great guest. But one of the things that I think I do want to chat about, and it's so funny that you're talking about vulnerability with your voice. I do think one of the things people are amazed by when watching you, and I think it's part of what gets those standing ovations mid-show, aside from, of course, you're a brilliant actor, we know that too, but just like your sheer vocal power. And I don't know if that's especially coming from a slight frame, that you're not a giant person, but like
Mhm.
the experience of just like the amount of oomph that comes out of you and your voice is like really thrilling as an audience member.
Mm.
So I want to get into maybe some of the granular details of that. But first off, how much do you feel like that was a God-given gift? How much of this is it lots of like training, or are you like hanging on chin-up bars like Michael Jordan trying to lengthen your vocal cords? Like how did you achieve this level of vocal power?
I do think like that was probably, that's an aspect of my voice that is just it comes with it.
Uh-huh.
I think I had a big voice as a kid. Um, yeah, and then I think as I grew older and trained more and started to understand my voice more too, I think I understand how to access it
Yep.
in a healthy way, and in a way that feels like works for me, because I also don't view myself necessarily as like a traditional Broadway belter,
Uh-huh.
because that is a kind of singing with, like the classic is Ethel Merman, or she just
Uh-huh.
had this enormous belt that was wild,
But when you say
and
your gift, what you feel like is was God given, what is the thing that you go, hey, this feels like I was lucky. I had a big voice as a child. Is it about
mm,
the ability to be loud for a long period of time without tiring? Like, what is the thing that you go, this was kind of given to me. This was already in me.
I think that yeah, I think that it's, as far as like the power that you're talking about, that it's just the stuff that I think I haven't had to think about.
Hmm.
There's a lot of stuff with technique and resonance and whatever that I've had to think about and
Uh-huh.
learn. Um
But adding more gas has never
Placement,
been
all of
hard.
that.
It's never been hard to be
Yeah,
like, oh, I get what you mean. I can get a little more there.
I think that that's just sort of part of what it is with how I sing, and and people ask me a lot too, like, how do you sing rock like that and not hurt yourself?
Hmm.
Are you hurting yourself? Kind of, got a lot of like, are you okay? um
But see,
and I think that's a
that's
thing
part of
I
what I
don't
mean.
understand either,
You
why I
seem
can't sing,
okay. Like
you
a
know.
lot of people sing the way you sing, and I go, "Oh God, I'm worried for them." And I
Yeah.
just, it's what's one of the things really thrilling as an audience member. It's the same thing when you watch like stage combat, and you're like, "Oh, it's so thrilling because I'm not nervous for them." Like I was
Oh
never
yeah,
nervous
nothing
for
is
you.
worse than thinking somebody is actually hurt on
You're gonna get
stage.
stabbed.
It's
You're gonna trip.
terrifying.
You're gonna like right. And I
Yeah.
sometimes would feel that with some singers. You go, they're a little fatigued, and I watch what they're doing, and it feels like they're pushing, and so then I'm nervous
Mhm.
as I'm not a trained vocal technician, but knowing enough that I'm like, this sounds like it's a little unhealthy. It pulls me out of the
Yeah.
show. I never have that experience. No matter if you're squelting those highest high notes, it feels like, oh, she could do the whole song again and wouldn't be tired. Now that may not be true, but you've successfully given me that illusion that you're never going to run out of juice.
I mean, I don't generally think it's a good call to do anything on stage that I couldn't do again.
Uh huh.
You know, sure, there's things I wouldn't sing You Ought to Know more than like 3 times in a row,
Uh
full
huh.
out or something like that. But I'm not going to sit there and do it over and over and over and over again, and I'm magically not tired.
Uh huh.
But there's like a phrase about being stronger than your show. And so I don't
Hmm.
want to be at the very top of fraying myself, like hoping I can do it
Uh huh.
in what I'm doing in a show, because that's just not sustainable ultimately for 8 shows.
Totally agree. I mean, we can talk about 8 shows. Is it sustainable at all? But that's a different conversation. Um,
That's a different conversation. Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about, you mentioned, you some of the training. What was your vocal training journey? I mean, you can tell me teachers, you can tell me you've done, but maybe even just maybe most helpful for the listeners of like, what were you working on? If you go, this was already easy for me. What were the things
Hmm.
you go, oh, from 17 to whatever, if you started earlier, when were you really thinking, I need to improve this part of my head voice? I have to improve this. You said missing resonance. What were the things you were hoping to improve?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of vocal training as a child for sure. And I think I learned things like breath support and even just understanding voice and different things when I was a kid. But my adult training, I've been really fortunate to have the same vocal teacher the whole time I've lived in New York, who's
Hmm.
amazing. Um, and I really, even when I was doing Fun Home is when I first started to work with him, and I just didn't understand my voice very much. I could do
Hmm.
what I could do. But if, again, similar to acting training, if something on my instinct wasn't quite working, I had
Hmm.
no idea how
Hmm.
to do anything different. It was sort of like, well, this is what comes out, and now it doesn't feel good. So I don't know how to
Hmm.
navigate that. So I think primarily the biggest things that I have worked on is understanding how to mix, understanding what a mix even is really, um, and being able to actually consciously place things in
Hmm.
different parts of my resonances, and be able to change how I've placed it if I'm not feeling well,
Hmm.
if something feels tired, whatever. um, and that doesn't feel 100% accessible to me all the time. There's still things that feel a little mysterious that I'm still working on. um, but that, I would say, is really really the big thing.
So that's
Just
something like almost a decade of training with the same vocal tech. Are you
yeah.
still taking active voice lessons today? Or do you check-ins, or are you saying
Yes.
I'm you weekly, monthly? What does your training look like now?
I would say that I don't, when I'm not in a show, I'm not necessarily in weekly vocal lessons, but I
Hmm.
do still take them regularly. And then when I am in a show, I see my vocal teacher once a week, kind of like vocal physical therapy.
Hmm.
And he listens to my voice and he can hear where I'm at and he helps me stretch out stuff. So I think, especially when you're singing the same score over and over and over
Uh-huh.
again, you're just hitting the same spots in your voice constantly and it can get really stuck. So,
Hmm.
like with Jagged, for instance, I sang a lot of soprano stuff with my vocal teacher just to keep my
Hmm.
voice flexible. So I wasn't just hitting the same sort of rock skrelt thing
Yep.
and never giving my voice a break.
So smart. And all right, tell me this. I'm ready for my jaw to drop again. But how much in Jagged were you mixing? Like, how much were you? I guess maybe even thinking about. Like you mentioned, I don't want to give 100%. Were you thinking about? And I don't want to necessarily start a whole conversation about percentages and what do we give on a show. But were you
Sure.
thinking vocally? Hey, I know what my 100% is, and were you doing a lot of mixing in Jagged? My experience as a listener was like, oh, she basically didn't mix. So like, I would listen to Elizabeth mix, but I'd be like, but Lauren was just like belting the entire thing. Was that not true? Were you like, I'm mixing a little in there?
I think that the way that my voice works with rock scores is that actually a lot of it's like a mixed belt, I guess. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's um the way that I actually access power, I don't feel very powerful like straight belting when it gets high
Uh huh.
a certain range. I don't actually have a lot of power. It's just sort of unwieldy and not really s- harnessed in some sort of way that I have any control over. So I get to a certain part of my range, and with that type of music, with raw, it's actually like it is my version of singing in my mask a lot,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't sound necessarily like a Broadway version of singing in your mask.
Uh huh.
Um, but it's so I would say that a fair amount of it is actually a sort of a mix belt of some
Uh huh.
kind. But that's because that's where I'm actually able to access the power that I need
And then what do
versus
you?
just sort of what would feel like screaming.
Yes, totally. Well, I guess that's what I'm saying. Is like, what do you do? Are there any flourishes? Or I mean, obviously, it seems like you're doing a lot of straight tones, right? We can say that there's not a lot
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
vibrato up there, right? But
Yeah.
what are you doing vocally? I guess to shift it from what you would think of as a musical theater mixed belt to this pop rock sound. I mean, obviously, if anyone hasn't seen Alanis Morissette in this role
Yeah.
in this version of it, it was like a rock concert. I mean, in that moment, there was lights
Yeah.
flashing, and we felt like as an audience we're in a rock concert.
Yeah.
What are you adding or
Yeah.
changing to vocally to make that different?
In some ways I think I don't think about it super consciously because I find that being really present with just the feel of the music will do it
Hmm.
for you, and for at least in my experience, like I'm not able to really sing contemporary musical theater trying to bring in like Alanis
Right.
stuff
It's
or
not a
flair.
17% ad of a growl here, and you're that's more of a
Yeah,
feel for you.
like I've sang when I've done more musical theater style concerts, like I sing a song from Dear Evan Hansen, and
Hmm.
it's just a different feel,
Uh huh.
and that I can also use my mix belt in, but it's just like I don't know. I just feel that when you're present with the style and the feel of the music,
Hmm.
your voice can shift into different things.
Hmm.
Um, and when I'm doing something that is really rock and gritty, I think that is one thing that I can sort of choose to put in or not, is how much grit I'm doing at a certain period of time, and that
And
is
what does
probably the
grit mean
most.
to you when you say grit? Like I think I understand what that means, but what are you doing vocally to achieve grit?
I think that that's also the sort of, I don't know like what the mechanism is in my body, but it's like if I want to have a growl to something that feels like it actually has like dirtiness to it rather than like a clean tone.
Hmm.
There are some times that happens with my voice that is not in my control because it's something that just my voice does. But if I want to add extra into it, I can kind of tell myself to do that. Or if I want to really try to preserve and make a little bit more clean tone, if I'm not feeling as healthy,
Hmm.
um, that's something that uh, if I if I need to preserve some energy, I can take a little bit of that out.
Totally makes sense. And then what about when you're actually literally doing one of your rock concerts? I'm always curious of like, especially as a trained actor and someone who comes up in the world of
Hmm.
theater and musical theater, but theater, like how are you thinking about some of these songs from a performance perspective, or from an acting perspective? If you're singing, some of these rock songs, which if you see You Ought to Know, it is a deeply acted song, right? That is not just
Yeah.
a song. You're really, I'm deeply acting that. How does it change in terms of your performance style if you're at Rockwood or if you're, where you're going to do at Sony Hall?
Yeah, I think that when I'm doing not musical theater concerts, it's just a different way of accessing story with a song.
Mm,
You know, the way that I would sing You Ought to Know in the musical of Jagged is just different than how I would access that feeling and that storytelling for an actual rock concert.
hmm
Um, I think that to me, when I'm singing in concerts like that, it feels much more about accessing emotion rather than action, rather
hmm
than being like, I'm trying to affect a
Right.
change
You're not singing to
on
a
my
scene
partner.
partner in a concert. It's not like the
Right.
audience becomes your partner and I'm trying to
Right.
act to
Or
you.
I'm not doing it like a soliloquy song where I'm trying to work through something
Uh
or
huh.
I'm sorting through my feelings in that way. But it's about accessing sort of the actual, just the emotional truth of what that
hmm
song is.
Yep.
Um, and then there are ways to be playful with lyrics too, as if you are talking to somebody, but it happens differently in a rock concert because you'll see great performers who really, some of them do play out lyrics as if they're talking to somebody, depending on the
Yep.
song. But it's definitely different stylistically.
It's one of those things that I feel like schools have started getting a little wiser in helping to train, because I think the
Mm,
first time a musical theater actor does it, it can feel a little uncomfortable if you're like, "What do I do? I just
mhm.
stand here? Like, what do I do now if I'm in a cabaret or that kind of experience?"
Right. Well, and I think it also with some of these jukebox musicals too. There's it also requires, depending on the type of song that you're singing, some of them it actually does require for you to act more along the lines of a rock concert, of
Uh-huh.
how of accessing the emotional truth,
Yep.
because there are some lyrics that it'll look ridiculous for you to repeated pop phrases over and over again, to like
Yep.
really try to like put action on each of them.
Right.
It looks
Say them
silly.
different. Say them all different. You're like,
Yeah,
"Oh."
and then you start to look
Yeah.
like a parody of a musical
Yes.
theater person, but that is against what we're taught to do with monologues, with traditional musical
Yep.
theater songs. So there is something with how now these genres are getting blended, that
Yes.
depending on what you're doing, there is a different way of acting
Right.
them.
That even in the musical, there may be more of a feel as
Correct.
opposed to in this moment we blend into a concert and then we're back into a,
Yeah.
whatever that experience. I mean, we often tell that to our students who they have to prepare two musical theater songs for their process, but often they will have a
Mhm.
pop song in their back pocket. And when they like
Yeah.
fully act the pop song, we often kind of will mock them back of like, This is what this looks like. This is not right. You don't want to do that." You know,
Yeah, I saw, God, I saw a TikTok years ago of somebody,
TikTok couldn't have been that many years ago, Lauren. I
couldn't
mean,
have been that many,
come on.
so many years ago. No, like 2 years ago, like
Like
years ago.
19 years ago when TikTok.
Yeah, so old. No, but but this is a running joke, right? And it was somebody acting out the Paramore song "The Only Exception"
Uh huh.
as a musical theater
Uh huh.
person,
Uh huh.
as a joke, and it was like she had a moment before she had a discovery of the word exception in the chorus.
Mhm.
It was so hilarious and
Yep.
spot on. Um, and yeah, you don't want to end up looking like that.
Mm-mm. Not that person. Which this segues us beautifully into our game,
Mhm.
Lauren. I've already lowered your expectations here by
Okay.
telling you it's going to be a low stakes game. This is not right or wrong answers.
Okay.
Sometimes we do have challenging games, right? Sometimes the name that tune or a spelling bee or difficult trivia.
Oh
But
god.
today,
Okay, but I'm just a little baby, so keep it nice
yeah,
and
we're
and
keeping it
brief.
non-competitive. Well, no, it's just that we weren't feeling like we've been competitive recently. We need to mix it up. So here's the game. This is the game we're gonna play. It's called Is That a Musical? Okay. You and
Okay.
I are gonna be fancy Broadway producers. We're gonna sit on our yachts. We've ordered a couple
Oh,
drinks, and we're just
great.
gonna try to determine whether some of these existing intellectual properties could be turned into a musical. Make sense? No right or wrong
Yes.
answers. We're just gonna
I can't wait,
explore the
actually.
musicals. Okay.
Okay.
You ready to play? Is that a musical?
Yes, I'm ready.
The first one, it'll start you off with an easy one. Taylor Swift. Is this a musical?
Absolutely, that's a musical.
Absolutely music. What is it? Is it a biopic? Is it an original story? What is a Taylor Swift musical?
I think that it is a girl boss feminist coming of age
Original
story
story.
about a girl just trying to find love
Well,
and
obviously it's a
also
love story.
money and
Yeah.
success.
Money and success and just crushing it, and there's no bad characters. It's all just positive. Or the villains of her past relationships are ghosts in the chorus or something like that.
I love it. Right.
Unbelievably, this hasn't happened yet. Why not? Everything else, why not? She just doesn't want it until she's ready.
Well, I can't imagine that it hasn't been asked of her
We're not
yet.
the first two people who are thinking that Taylor Swift would
So
make
many people
money
have had
as
to
a
already
musical.
ask her.
I'm sure.
But honestly, her songs would lend themselves because they're very story oriented and very lyric driven.
Here's the question. So many different styles. Is that helpful for a musical? Or is it like, it'd be too incoherent because it's like, it's country over here and now it's really pop and now it's this different, like, is that positive? Because it's like different characters have different things to do, or would it hold it back? Does it need a Tom Kit to come in and fix it up?
I was about to say, I think that's why you have a Tom Kit.
Mm-hmm.
He would
Tie the
make
knot.
it. I mean, did you see SpongeBob talk about different musical genres,
Truth.
all those different people writing? I mean, and he made it feel like a coherent score.
Just got to thread the needle. Just need a little needle threading.
Tom Kit.
Tom, we're going to have you on and you're going to work on Taylor Swift. That's what we'll do this live. All right, what about Adele? Is Adele a musical?
Ooh. I also think very lyric driven.
Very lyric driven.
But most of the big hits ballads. So I think that would be
how do you write the other part of the story, right? It just feels like a lot of, like, someone like you're like, you can write a whole musical just about that character, but is there enough different stuff?
But there's Rolling in the Deep. Great up tempo.
You got the whole chorus as part of that.
When we were young, all of the like, the Goldens are really ballads.
Have you listened to the more recent stuff? The Elizabeth and I, every time because it was right after we had Solva, the Take It Easy on Me, I'm like,
no, that song is absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
Just like full, I'm weeping just like saying the name. I'm like crying. Like,
no, when that song came out, I listened to it on repeat.
It's just and our Google research, I was trying to double check that if any of these actually already happened. I didn't know about it. But there was actually a Broadway musical called Adele, spelled the exact same way, not the pop star, from 1913. Have you ever heard of this play?
Absolutely not.
I run a musical theater company. I've never heard of Adele. Hits like Gay Soldier Boy and When the Little Birds Are Sleeping from Adele the musical. Look it up on Wikipedia.
I really want to see the 2023 version of Gay Soldier Boy. That musical song.
I think it would be very different than what
very different than the 1913. Oh my god.
Okay, so we're 2 for 2 so far. These are both musicals. We think maybe Adele might not get out of workshop, but it's at least we're going to give it a shot.
Adele would take some work, but I think it would be great.
Okay, what about Justin Bieber? Is that a musical?
What's funny about this game is I feel like anybody will make anything a musical.
I mean, if you can make money, we're sitting here on the yachts.
So here's the thing: is I feel like no, and then I feel that we will see it in 2 years.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel
the thing is, we're going to say no, and then there's going to be somebody who's going to be singing "Baby" really seriously on Broadway in 4 years.
Just acting and discovering every line, baby. Yeah, for sure. I do think no. Baby, Justin Bieber for me is a hard no. I don't want to be the person producing the Justin Bieber musical. Sorry,
I don't think the catalog is deep enough for it. I don't think so. I don't.
Deep is not a word we often say relating to Justin Bieber. Okay, what about this? Beyonce. Is that a musical?
Oh. I mean, I feel honestly what I thought was, because I think it's like certain things too, like why like maybe there's not really a super successful Whitney Houston musical. There's some people where I'm like, Beyonce is, I mean, it happens. Like you had Adrienne Warren fit Tina Turner shoes. Which is crazy to find somebody who can like actually embody her.
But you think like not while she's alive. Like while she's alive, you can't have someone else be Beyonce.
I just think
in a
it would
Beyonce
be
musical.
really, really, really hard to play Beyonce,
Uh-huh. You could do
I
the
feel.
but again, there was no Alanis, so you could do the Beyonce musical
Yes.
music with no
Yes.
character of Beyonce. I mean,
Yes.
like, I'm sure you got asked this all the time. Elizabeth be like, "Oh, you're playing Alanis in the musical?" She's like, "No, not really. It's not how it. It's a
No.
different thing. It's
Yes,
a,
we did,
it's
all
in
of
the
us. All
songs."
like, "So who's Alanis?
You're like, "Well, Alanis
When
is
is that
Alanis," but
happening?"
yeah.
What do you
Okay.
think about Beyonce?
I think yes. This is gonna be it's gonna be a difficult job. Here's where we don't necessarily need the Tom Kidd of the world, though. Of course, we can always use Tom Kidd. We need a really creative book writer to write us a
Yes.
cool original story that's going to be worthy of some of these songs. But you
Yes.
have so much to choose from in terms of what you could be tying together. So I'm going to
I
say yes. I
agree.
green
I
light
agree with that. I
Beyonce.
think it could I think it could be great.
Prince, is that a musical? Prince.
Oh, wow. Yes, I think that would be a cool, weird, zany musical. That would be
Zany, a lot
awesome.
of dance. I feel like there could,
I think
you know,
actually the Prince musical would be pretty sick.
I feel like with Times Square now, they just do drugs on the street. So there could just be like drugs as part of the experience of the audience. Like there's like a joint under your
There could
seat.
be a weed truck parked outside of the
Just
theater
and
and
it's like a
just
psychedelic experience. Like I could be really into
ah,
that sort of. Yeah, like well, I'm
the
self-editing
roving weed
myself.
trucks.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. There was a Prince of Broadway. That's what Google so said, but that's a different musical.
Mhm.
Prince of Broadway. This would be Prince
Yes.
on Broadway.
Yes, correct.
Okay, now this is where I'm gonna have to rely on you because this is getting out of my era here.
Oh, okay.
Billie Eilish, is that a musical?
I'm bad. I am also not the
Mm.
person to ask because I'm like, I know the hits. I know a
Mhm.
couple of hits.
Mm, I don't. I really
But I
don't.
don't know the catalog very well. So I
Okay.
honestly can't speak to. I mean,
It's not for us to produce.
I feel like that she is a good storyteller.
Yep.
I don't know. Like I'm trying to imagine bad guy like vocally on a
Uh-huh.
Broadway stage.
Uh-huh. Here's the other question. Is Billy Elliot too similar to Billie Eilish? Would that confuse people if they're like, I've already seen that
Mm.
musical
I
with the
think that
dancing
would
boy?
confuse the commuters from New Jersey for sure.
I feel like it would. A lot of the people who buy the tickets would be like,
They would be
didn't
like, I thought I was seeing Billy
is this a
Elliot.
revival? What's happening?
There
That's not what they sound like in New
are no
Jersey.
dancing children.
What's that? He's not Irish or English or whatever he is. All right, my last one, Madonna. Is that a musical?
I, is that becoming one?
You're like, is that already a musical?
Oh no, there's the biopic film, which Diablo Cody wrote the first draft of Jagged Little Pill.
Our Google
There's a
research was
biopic
typing
happening.
in one word to say that it hadn't happened yet. So it doesn't
Madonna
mean it's
musical?
not.
Question
Madonna,
mark.
literally. I wrote Madonna, Broadway musical, Billie Eilish, Broadway musical. Yeah.
I feel like the Madonna one. I jury's out for me about whether I think it should be a
Uh-huh.
musical.
But you think it
I
will
can
be.
see it, and I can also I think it will
Yeah.
be. I
There's
think that if that's not already in the works, I will be shocked.
Again, someone
Shocking.
has thought of it. Someone has thought of. Though I do feel like there's something like was great about Jagged, and I think and Michael Jackson, some of these people, where they're hitting the right age of people who are ticket buyers of like, oh, this
Mhm.
was nostalgia. Like it's one of the weirdest experiences. I don't think it's happened to you yet, Lauren, but I walk into most bars now, and they're like playing music from my youth. When it used to
Right,
be like, oh,
right,
that's just for my dad. This is like old people music, and now it's like, oh
correct.
God,
You're the
I'm the
old
old
people
people
music.
music.
You're the old people
But
music.
that's
Yeah.
what Jagged. I mean, Jagged was my youth. Definitely. I mean, of course, Alanis extends for many decades, but
Yes.
it does feel like
But
Madonna might almost
the sort
be
of the nucleus of the
yeah,
Jagged Little Pill
late
album coming out.
'90s, early 2000s. That was the most popular, and those people are now adults buying Broadway tickets. Are the Madonna fans, the true deep Madonna fans, too old already, or are they going to come out
Ooh,
in their 60s or 50s or whatever they are and represent?
I don't know.
I did
That's a
also
good
find in my
question.
little bit of research, Madonna was in a Broadway play, like as a child human being.
As a child, what
She was in
show?
David Mamet's Speed the Plow, just a play,
What?
non-musical. I mean,
She was
now
in a Mammoth play?
let's be honest. I just want to be throwing myself out there. This could be like AI deep fake that I found this thing. But when I typed in Madonna Broadway show, it came up. She was in like at 19 or 20 or something. She was in a
I'm
David
going
Mamet
to
Speed the Plow.
actually Google this right now on this
I was
podcast for
sure you were
myself
about to be
to
like, I'm gonna text Madonna and just double check if she was in it. You're like, I'm
Can
like,
you
let me
imagine?
be
I
like,
was
hold
like,
on,
let
let
me
me
just
text
ask
her.
Madonna.
You were in Speed the
Um,
Plow? That's amazing.
no, she absolutely was in 1988.
1988. Isn't that
There's a
amazing?
beautiful production photo of her. She's
Looks
gorgeous.
stunning. Looks stunning.
She was in it.
A
Yep.
breath of a career, that Madonna. Any ones I
Oh
missed?
my
Now,
god.
this is the use your choice. Is there any that now,
Ooh.
those we got some yeses. We got maybe 3 or 4 yeses that we're going to produce, but anything else that we're like, this would be really good we got to have an Eminem musical or a, I don't know. Is there something where you're like, you really miss this?
Honestly, I think a la the sort of Anne Juliet vibe, I
Mm-hmm.
think it could actually be very cool to make a musical of like 90s rap,
90s rap, like
you
90s
know?
rap meaning like pretty like Hamilton feeling like, and the hop, the hip hop, like it's gonna be pretty slow, like so that still older white audiences can still understand it. Or
I
do you mean
don't
like
know.
90s, like as we get into gangster rap?
Maybe this is, I mean, I'm talking like maybe gangster rap, like maybe this isn't for the old white audiences. I don't know.
Oh,
But I was just thinking, I was like, because now these musicals are happening with compilations of genre,
uh-huh.
kind of.
Yep.
And I mean,
You mean genre, not art. So it's not like a Tupac musical. It's like a 90s
right.
through 2000. This is
Correct. I
our
mean, I guess that these sort of the Anne Juliet, I don't know if it's all a Max Martin catalog, who's this big producer. So
uh-huh.
I don't know if there's like a binding agent in that way. But I feel
Well, what are you
like
talking about? And Juliet's about Shakespeare. That was written by Shakespeare, I think, right?
the whole thing was written
Yeah.
by,
I
yes.
thought that
Shakespeare
was
wrote "Hit Me, Baby, One More Time."
I
Actually,
thought
I don't know if you
so.
know that.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
not
know if you
true.
knew. Katy
37
Perry's "Roar" is
plays.
actually written
Yeah,
originally by
a
William
bunch of
Shakespeare.
sonnets and a couple
Yeah.
bops. That's what Shakespeare did. I don't that's why people were like, it can't be one person. It's too much breadth of his work.
Because he wrote bops,
Yeah, that's
real
what he did.
bops.
That's what he did. Bop 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 bop.
Yeah, that's how you actually know
That's how
iambic
you can
pentameter.
do it. So
Really good.
what if I
That is a
started
theater
teaching it that way?
educator if I've ever seen
What if
one.
I started teaching it that way? It's like Aunt Juliet. Ba, 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 ba.
Bop.
We're getting off the rails. I want to change lanes slightly and just ask. This is my other question that didn't fit into the
Mm.
earlier stuff, which was
Yes.
about your sense of personal style. Because I will
Oh.
say I have seen, and of course, is over the course of some years, a real range of styles that you can rock. And I guess I'm
Thank
wondering,
you.
like, where does that come from? I think, especially from a young person who I'm touching myself as if I'm a young person, but I mean my young audience who might
Yes.
go, where would I get the boldness to do that? Or who gives you permission to go ahead and like try all those things? Like, I think it
Mm.
seems very foreign if you're an 18-year-old who's just about to go to college to be like, what do you do on a red carpet? And how do you put this on a social media? So, how did you find guidance?
Mm.
What inspired you? What gave you this sense of style that you sort of put out into the world?
I mean, I think that it's definitely, as you say, like a range. I think things have changed for me a lot over the years. Um, what I feel like wearing, what I feel comfortable in, all of this stuff. And, I think it's very fun for me now to explore for myself what I want to wear to maybe red carpet things or work things that aren't as femme, which isn't, I
Mm-hmm.
think um, not modeled as much, or just like what looks right on my body that isn't femme, that's also dressy,
Mm-hmm.
is different and an exploration and new, which is really can be intimidating, but it's also really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also just think that there's ways, I don't know, I think there's ways of examining what is considered professional, what is
Uh-huh.
considered like
Examining
showing
me, like
up.
pushing the boundaries of that, of like, hey, this is
Is
professional. Why not?
Yeah, in some way, or sort of there's things that are expected. I mean, there's such as even just like expectation that is put on for women to like wear makeup to a lot
Mm-hmm.
of work things. Um, and that's not to say that I don't wear makeup to certain work things, but I've had that question for myself, like,
Mm-hmm.
why is it that I feel like I'm being unprofessional if I don't put on
Uh-huh.
a face of makeup for XYZ
Uh-huh.
work event or
Yep.
meeting or whatever. So I think that as we sort of look at boundaries of things like patriarchy and heteronormativity and all this stuff, it's like there's ways to explore how we want to express ourselves in a professional setting. Um, Not that there are no boundaries to that, and that there are some things that I think it's like, yeah, that's objectively unprofessional, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're seeing that there's space for more people and ways of expressing yourself. And so I think that to me, stuff like a red carpet is like, that's a place to wear stuff that I would never wear in my
Uh-huh.
life and just like try something that's fun
Uh-huh.
versus something that maybe feels like, well, that's super safe, you
Right.
know?
And are you guided by that? I mean, do you have, is it in talking to stylists, or is it talking, or are you talking to even representation in terms of like, what is my overall brand? If you think about it's award season,
Mhm.
I'm now going to wear a course of 20 different outfits over the course of like, is that something you're
Right.
conscious of in a large scale, or is it more, hey, I'm just having fun exploring a bunch of different stuff as I go through this?
I mean, I think that I'm sort of fortunate in that I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this is fortunate, I guess, but I didn't really have to. I didn't have a traditional like Tony's season, awards
Mm-hmm.
season, where I had to really think about like here's the 20 outfits that I have to wear
Mm-hmm.
and are they coherent and whatever. And so I didn't have to ask myself those questions per se, but um I did work with an amazing stylist for the Tonys, and I think something that he said to me is like, you just know when you put something on if it feels like you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that um, wearing stuff that feels like you and makes you feel good and good in your body and just good in your spirit, um, that can be very diverse because people are diverse. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to just wear similar stuff. But I think that guiding yourself along those lines of like, this is stuff that makes me feel awesome, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I think that's kind of the guideline that I want to go with is just what do I feel good in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that being conscious of things like brand and whatever, it's not that you shouldn't think about that at all because it is good to at least be aware that that is an aspect of our business, but I think it can get very robotic if you let that be your sort of
Totally.
leading principle of like, well, but does this fit my brand? It's
Right.
like you're ultimately you.
Yep.
And your brand should just end up, I suppose, being something that is a way of representing you,
Yep.
and not the other way around.
Yep, totally makes sense. I mean, I know another fun Home Alone. We had Beth Malone on the pod, and she was chatting
Oh
about
yeah,
the like her hair and just how different she was
hmm.
seen by the world. Short hair, long hair, what she wore on red carpets. She would notice the
Yes.
auditions she was getting called into for different. So not necessarily that she
Yeah.
was consciously cultivating, I am this box I want to fit into, but she was just like, I'm aware of the world perceives me very differently. I wonder how much
Absolutely.
that's changed in the 10 years, or maybe even a little over 10 years since then,
I
or if
think
that
it
still really
has
exists.
in a little bit of ways and also hasn't. I mean, I think that some people have their perceptions, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I think that it is a business in which the last thing you did is often what you're perceived as like being able to do,
Mm-hmm.
sort of. And not everybody, it's not easy to get everybody to be very imaginative about your
Mm-hmm.
abilities. Um, you know, I think that there's ways everybody has to sort out for themselves the ways that they want to play into that and the ways that they
Mm-hmm.
it's not worth perhaps happiness in your life to like stress too much about that
Mm-hmm.
because I also, you know, as a queer person, you know, yeah, when I cut my hair, how I dress, different things, it's like it for sure. I think about how that could affect what I'm asked to audition for.
Totally.
But
Yep.
I also, there's a certain aspect of it where I also want to live my life the way that I want to live it too. So you find the balance, each person. I think you have to find a balance for yourself with that.
Totally makes sense. Okay, you survived the gauntlet. We'll just wrap up with
I did
any advice. Maybe I mentioned at the beginning, maybe any advice for parents out there in terms of
it. Hmm.
your own experience, what worked, what didn't work. What things you would want to be different, what things you really liked, and then also for those kids out there, as many of whom who want to be a Lauren Patton when they grow up.
Yeah.
What did you do that you really liked and you hold on to? What advice would you give to them, and what stuff that you go, I would do this a little differently?
I mean, I think what we're talking about, what we just sort of landing on about thinking about brand and different things, I guess what I'd say to a young person is uh, you have to, your life is the most important thing, you know? And again, it's not that being conscious of it and thinking about it that is useful. And also, I think that if your life starts to suffer based on what you think you need to be doing for booking work or
Mm-hmm.
your career, you're you start to dull what is special and unique about you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do think that having a full and embodied life is what ultimately makes you a special artist. And um, I think that that always needs to be the priority to me. Um, you know, and I think with parents too, what I'd say, I was so so lucky to have the parents that I had who were so supportive of me, um, and really believed in me. And I was never told to have a backup plan. I was never my you know I just I was never made to feel like it was an indulgence what I was doing, and like, we'll see, or you better kind of deliver in a certain way or
Mm-hmm.
else it's not, you don't really have our support. um and I think that I have a lot of my friends from NYU, from that training and different things, even the people who didn't go on to continue to act, are all using their
Mm-hmm.
degree in beautiful ways. I have a friend who's a voice teacher for speaking voice, for public speakers, and I have a friend who is a movement educator and a yoga teacher, and um, there was a lot that they got from their training for their life, regardless of the fact that they aren't acting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that creativity is something to be celebrated and uplifted, and how that can enrich your child's life regardless of whether they book work. It's I think the fear around, will you make a living? People figure out how to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people leave this business if they decide it's too hard to make a living in, which it is. It's wildly difficult
Mm-hmm.
to make a living in this business. But a lot of kids grow up and realize, this actually, I want to have stable income.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's important to me now that I'm an adult, and I am going to find a different way to be creative and also have a stable income. I think um, my experience of having parents who just didn't instill doubt in me as a kid was invaluable,
It's
and
so well
I'm
said.
grateful for it.
Yeah, it's so well said. And we talk about the modern economy. Who knows what AI is going to do, and who knows all these new things that are going to really change what jobs are 15, 20 years from now. But I don't
Absolutely.
think creativity is going to be less important than it was now. Like, if anything, it's going to be more important. The ability to think creatively and,
Yeah.
speak on your feet comfortably, and all those things are going to be, I think, only more important, not less.
There's so many ways to use creativity. There's so many ways, and I think it's a disservice to look at acting training or just time spent acting as like it's a waste if you don't spend your
Right.
entire life acting.
Not
Then
on Broadway by 25 and then winning a Tony
yeah.
by 30. Yeah.
Then why did we take those classes? I
Yeah.
just think that's a reductive way to look at it, and I think it's actually a lot more expansive what the creative life can be.
Well, and very comforting to hear that from somebody who did do all the things, who has been on Broadway and won a Tony Award and is now in a series regular and all these amazing things. Um, Lauren, I have to say thank you for your time today. We got your upcoming Sony Hall performance July 10th. Anything else that we should be looking out for in terms of the plug? When does the series drop? Do we know
We
that?
don't have a release date yet, but it's called Death and Other Details. It'll
Mm-hmm.
be on Hulu, so keep an eye out.
Death and
Hopefully
other
we'll,
details. And
yeah.
hopefully we'll find all this information at Patten Lauren. If people want to follow you on Instagram, they'll be
Yes.
able to see all the drops and the drips as it comes
Right.
out. Um,
Absolutely.
Lauren, thanks for the time today. It was such a joy.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you.